Welcome. My name is Karen Ross. I am the Director of Graduate Programs and Conflict Resolution in the Department of Conflict Resolution, Human Security, and Global Governance. And thank you, Jeff. And I'd like to welcome you all to our annual Benjamin and Sylvia Slomoff and Judith Green Luce Lectureship in Conflict Resolution. We're extremely honored to be joined this evening by Congressman Jim McGovern, who represents the 2nd District of Massachusetts in the U.S. House of Representatives, and whose lecture is entitled Promoting Human Rights is a Foundation for Peace at Home and Abroad. I want to thank everyone here for coming, and I want to give a special thanks to our department staff, especially Kelly Ward Mason and Jason Paisano, for everything they've done to make today a success. As I'm sure you can imagine, organizing a set of events like this and like these, we had a student meet and greet with the congressman earlier. It takes a tremendous amount of work to do well. So thank you to Kelly and Jason for all of the work that you do. I also want to thank Lee Murphy for all of her support for this event, and my colleague Jeff Pugh for everything he's done to help make this event happen. Before we begin, I want to just say a few words about this lectureship and the benefactor for which it's named, Ben Slomoff. Ben was a student in the conflict resolution program here. He received first a certificate and then a master's degree in 1997 after completing his bachelor's at UMass Boston a few years before. What's important to know is that Ben's academic pursuits here and everything that came after them came in his retirement, after he owned a shoe business for many years, and prior to that had an extended career in the armed forces, starting during World War II. So he was 80 when he first joined our program. After finishing his degree, Ben launched a new career as a mediator and arbitrator, and through the 2010s, he mediated and arbitrated several times a week, sometimes holding multiple million-dollar clients in his docket simultaneously. And I'm told that he also published a couple books of poetry during that time. He was a regular presence at this lectureship, flying out from California almost every year. And he last joined us for the lecture that we held in October 2020 over Zoom. He passed away a few months later in December 2020, just a few weeks after his 107th birthday. I'm very honored to have had the chance to meet Ben and to share his story with you all now. And to let you know that with his generous support, we've held a Slomoff lectureship every year since 2000. These lectures have brought us some of the most well-known and influential people in the diplomacy, peace building, and conflict resolution fields, including Morton Deutsch, Senator George Mitchell, Dennis Ross, and many more. Today we're joined via Zoom, I believe, by members of Ben's family, including his grandsons, Adam and Brian Green. I'll also note that Ben's great-granddaughter, Annika Green, is a student here at UMass Boston as well. So thank you so much to the Slomoff family for joining us. And we're joined by several other key members of our own UMass Boston community, our own students, staff, and faculty, of course, but also Adunia Remy, the director of the McCormick Graduate School of Policy and Global Studies. Thank you, Adunia, for your continued support of all of our work. And finally, it's an honor to have with us UMass Boston's provost tonight, and I'd like to ask you to all join me in welcoming Provost Joseph Berger to introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Good evening. All right, C-. We'll try that again. Good evening. Good evening. All right, much better. So it's a real honor and privilege to be here with all of you this evening and to be able to introduce our distinguished guest, Congressman Jim McGovern. Congressman McGovern represents the 2nd District here in Massachusetts in the United States House of Representatives. You know, after working his way through college, so it's great to have you on a university campus. He earned a BA in history and a master's in public administration from the School of Public Affairs at American University. And Congressman McGovern then worked for more than a decade for Congressman Joe Moakley from right here in South Boston, who has been a great champion throughout his life and career of UMass Boston, including the Moakley Chair that is in the McCormick School. So Congressman McGovern then himself ran for Congress first in 1996 and has been reelected every 2 years since then. And as one of the top Democrats, he's on the powerful House Rules Committee, a member of the House Agriculture Committee, and co-chair for the bipartisan Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. He is a global leader working to end hunger, protect human rights, and promote peace. In fact, he's known as a leading voice on ending hunger and food insecurity, both in the United States and globally. More germane to this evening's lecture, Jim McGovern is a powerful champion who focuses on domestic and international human rights. And he has advocated for human rights right here in our own backyards, in the United States, but also in countries such as El Salvador, Sudan, Colombia, and the region of Tibet. And currently, he is one of the strongest voices in Congress, opposing the raft of executive orders that are undermining human rights right here in our own country. And as he's noted in other speeches, courage, not acquiescence, is what we need right now. And we deeply appreciate his strong advocacy work on behalf of Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia, who was illegally deported to El Salvador, and for his work on behalf of our students and the nearly 1,000 other students around the country who have been revoked as their non-immigrant status and as visa holders, depriving them of their right to an education here in our university. So at this critical time in our history, at this moment, Jim McGovern is the ideal speaker for the Slomoff Lecture Series, and it is truly a privilege and honor to have Congressman Jim McGovern here with us tonight.
Well, first of all, let me thank Provost Berger for the introduction. After that build-up, I can hardly wait to hear what I want to say. And I want to thank Dr. Karen Ross for her words and for her involvement in this. And I also want to acknowledge Professor Jeff Pugh, who works with me in the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. And I have benefited from his expertise and look forward to a lifelong collaboration with him and so many people that I've met here today. I know that an event like this doesn't happen without hard work and a lot of people. So I want to thank you also to the staff who planned and organized today's symposium. I want to thank the faculty. I want to thank the administration. I want to thank the students and friends for coming today and the Slomoff family for making this symposium possible. And again, Dr. Ross, thank you for the history of this lecture series. It really is inspiring. And again, I want to thank the students. I had an opportunity to have an interaction with them before this speech here today, and I said to them then, and I'm going to say it again now. After interacting with them, I have a lot of hope for the future because I was in a room with people who are dedicated to good. And I'm someone who serves in Congress, and I'm in the room with a lot of people who are dedicated to doing not so good things. So it really is kind of a lift for me personally. So I want to thank you for that. Somebody asked me about the beads on my hand. One of the neat things about being in Congress is you get to meet some interesting people. And over the years, I've met on many occasions with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And in May of last year, I actually went to Dharamsala and I met with him again. And again, incredible inspirational figure. But he gave me these Tibetan prayer beads. And he told me that it's supposed to help me deal with my negativity and my uncertainty and my fear. I love them, but they're not working. All right. I need some beads for this hand and maybe around my neck. But I really appreciate the invitation to speak here today in the Department of Conflict Resolution, Human Security and Global Governance at UMass Boston. Wow, that's a mouthful. But I love that name because those are the tools we need in this time of tension, war, and social distrust. You know, there's always a risk when you hand a politician a microphone that he's just going to tell you what you want to hear, and probably for a lot longer than you want to hear it. But today, I want to share some lessons that I have learned, sometimes the hard way, from more than 40 years of working to promote human rights. Now, some of those lessons can be tough to hear, but they also offer hope in the troubled times that we find ourselves in today. You know, I got my start in human rights during the war in El Salvador in the 1980s. At the time, I was a 23-year-old staffer working for Congressman Joe Moakley of South Boston. You know, he represented the 9th District of Massachusetts, which included this campus, which he loved very, very much. And I'm very pleased that the legacy of my old boss is honored through the work of the Moakley Chair of Peace and Reconciliation, based here in the McCormick School at UMass Boston. But one day, a group of refugees who had fled El Salvador and ended up in Boston came to Joe Moakley's office and asked for help. They included students, labor activists, and human rights defenders. And they were afraid that they would be sent back to El Salvador, where their lives would be in grave danger from a brutal regime that met its critics with violence and torture. Moakley was a self-described bread and butter, nuts and bolts politician, and he cared a lot about making life better for his constituents. And these refugees told their personal stories about the horrors of war and the human rights violations that they had witnessed in their country. And Moakley was moved by their testimonies. And then he asked me to go to El Salvador to investigate and to see what I could do to help. You know, what I saw there was a tense and complex country gripped by fear and by violence. Death squads and military forces had killed tens of thousands of civilians, including the high-profile murders of Archbishop Oscar Romero, 4 U.S. churchwomen, and so many, many others. But I also met many brave and committed people who were standing up to the regime. They called out its tyranny and they demanded change. They were building solidarity networks with people in the United States and in other countries. And at the Central American University, known as the UCA, I met several Spanish Jesuit priests who showed that academics and people of faith can and must defend truth, peace, and justice. I gotta tell you, they inspired me. They inspired me with their wisdom and their courage and helped to restore my faith as a Catholic. You know, even though I got rejected to every Jesuit school I applied to, I felt I was in solidarity with the Jesuits. But eventually, building on the efforts begun by Father Segundo Montes, who was one of those priests, and many others, we were able to get a bill passed into U.S. law to create temporary protected status for Salvadorans and other immigrant communities in the United States, making good on our promise to those refugees who had come to Moakley's office asking for our help. And a few years after my initial visit to El Salvador, this was in November of 1989, the trajectory of the war and of the people of El Salvador changed. And it changed my life too. I was awakened one morning by a phone call telling me that my friends at the Jesuit University at the UCA, 6 of these Jesuit priests, along with their housekeeper and her daughter, had been brutally murdered. They were gunned down in cold blood as they prepared for bed because they stood for the truth and because they were trying to establish channels to negotiate a peace between the warring parties. Those murders shocked the world. And Congressman Moakley was appointed by Speaker Tom Foley at the time to lead a commission to investigate what happened. And then Moakley appointed me as his lead investigator, and he asked me to return to El Salvador. And the more people I spoke to, and the more evidence there was that the murders had been committed by an elite battalion of the Salvadoran military. This battalion had been trained by the United States and used weapons that we had provided them. and they were directed to carry out the murders by officials at the highest level of the Salvadoran government. When the commission exposed those truths, it spurred Congress to act and to pass what became known as the Moakley Bill. And this law said that if the United States would cut military assistance to El Salvador in half, if it found that the country was engaged in human rights violations, or if it failed to negotiate in good faith for peace talks. It actually sent a signal that the United States would no longer be complicit, giving a blank check to foreign militaries to act with impunity just because they claimed to be fighting communism. These cuts to military aid and public backlash to the Jesuit murders were some of the factors that led both sides to come to the negotiating table. With UN mediation and pressure from the US Congress to end the war, they signed a peace agreement in 1992. Demanding justice and standing up for human rights had a direct role in making peace. It made a difference. I have spent my career fighting to defend human rights. To me, it makes logical and moral sense that a world governed by rules is better than one where bullies can do what they want and where might makes right. Human rights gives us a universal standard for behavior. We all deserve to live in dignity because we are human, not because we are rich or are friends with powerful people, but because of our common humanity. And the world is more peaceful and more stable when we all agree to respect these basic rights and expect the same from others. As the co-chair of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission in the House of Representatives, I've used my voice to shine a light on violations around the world through hearings and letters and other tools. Some regimes didn't like it very much when we exposed their atrocities and held them accountable. Sometimes they've lashed out when criticized because they can't defend their actions with truth. I have been sanctioned by the Chinese government because they didn't like my advocacy to end their repression of Tibetans, end their genocide in Xinjiang, and end their crackdown on democracy in Hong Kong. I consider this designation a badge of honor. And the current government of El Salvador, under President Bukele, sent me angry tweets after I called out their appalling conditions in their mega prisons, where they have incarcerated over 80,000 people. According to Amnesty International, 3 out of every 100 men in El Salvador is now in prison, the highest incarceration rate in the world. And when I visited that country last November, I heard horrific stories of young men being thrown into jail because of tattoos or because of living in the wrong neighborhood, of parents who couldn't find out where their children were being held or why, of starvation, of forced labor, and torture being used as tools of control. Now our government is rounding up Venezuelans and others, accusing them with little evidence or no evidence of being gang members. They are then shipping them to these torture prisons, to these concentration camps in El Salvador with no due process or transparency. By now, many of you have heard the name of Kilma Abrego Garcia, a native of El Salvador. He's married and has a child, both U.S. citizens. He was granted a work permit by the Department of Homeland Security, and he regularly reported his presence to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Last month, ICE officials approached Garcia in a parking lot, physically separating him from his son, and put him on a plane to El Salvador and into the notorious terrorism confinement center. This isn't deportation, this is a rendition. An ICE official in a court filing admitted that they made a mistake. Garcia had done nothing wrong. The Supreme Court has unanimously ordered his return. President Bukele visited the White House on Monday and said he will not return this innocent prisoner. President Trump, defying the order of the Supreme Court, didn't even ask. This perversion of justice is outrageous and ominous. The US government is deporting people they arbitrarily claim to be gang members or terrorists with no evidence or transparency. President Trump publicly said he is exploring rendition for US citizens. Understand this, unless we all have due process, none of us have due process. If there is a group of people who are denied their rights, what is to stop the government from claiming you are a part of that group? That is the slippery slope we are on, a slope that leads inevitably to fascism. Now, you don't have to belong to the same political party as me or have the same policy preferences as me. Our shared commitment to democracy, human rights, and the Constitution should unite us all in calling out human rights abuses wherever we see them, whether they are committed by our adversaries, friends, or even our own government. I have spent years tracking the Chinese government's behavior on human rights and rule of law as chairman of the Congressional Executive Commission on China. And I can tell you with confidence that the actions of the Trump administration, enforced disappearances, arbitrary detention, suppression of speech, intimidation of lawyers, judges, and institutions very much resemble the actions of Xi Jinping's government. This is a crisis moment, my friends. I cannot overstate this. The United States president is defying an order of the Supreme Court. He is conspiring with a foreign dictator to rendition US residents, and he is talking about the possible rendition of citizens to a prison where they will likely be beaten, starved, and tortured without due process because he doesn't like what they say, or because he doesn't like the way, because they don't look right, or because their skin tone is different. And let us not forget that this is not just about Americans. Tens of thousands of Salvadorans are being subject to the deprivations in these torture prisons. The people of El Salvador, who have come to admire and love, have the same right to fundamental freedoms as Americans. And our government, and our United States government, is once again sadly complicit in these crimes. So what can we do? The first step is for all of us to speak out. We must make it clear that we will not accept any government, especially our own government, ignoring the law and the Constitution while trampling on the freedoms and lives of people living in our country. And if we don't, it only emboldens those who want to strip us of our rights. And speaking out for human rights doesn't always get bad actors to stop their abuses. We can be honest about that. But it can make their decisions more costly. To tell the truth about what is happening so they don't get away with killing, repressing, and exploiting their people without anyone knowing. That way we create incentives to adhere to the rules. Because when the world is paying attention, we can isolate countries that prey on their own people. We can refuse to trade with them, or we can apply targeted sanctions on leaders who make decisions to unleash pain and suffering for their own power and wealth. And it is important to distinguish between the people and the government. I don't support general sanctions on a country that often harm the people more than they harm the regime, as we have seen in Cuba. But targeted tools like the global Magnitsky sanctions, which were established through legislation that I led, are powerful ways of holding corrupt government officials who violate human rights personally accountable, freezing their assets and limiting their ability to travel to the US or allied countries. We also have to realize that human rights are important not only around the world, but also down the block. We need to be just as committed to recognizing and defending human rights here at home in our own communities as we are to defending them around the world. That includes recognizing that human rights are not only about civil rights, but also social and economic rights. The fact that anyone goes hungry in the richest country on earth is a sign of fundamental inequities in our society. And in fact, 47 million people in the United States of America are food insecure. 47 million people. Where they live with the risk of not having enough to eat every day. Hunger is a political condition. You know, we have the resources to end it. We know what to do. But what we lack is the political will. That has to change. Look, I have long argued that food is a human right. I know there are faculty and grad students here at UMass Boston working on food security who agree with that principle. In fact, so does His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who said, and I quote, "Peace can only last where human rights are respected, where the people are fed, and where individuals and nations are free," end quote. In Congress, I am the co-chair of the bipartisan House Hunger Caucus, and I see the work to ensure that every child, that every senior can have access to food to eat as part of the same struggle as for basic human rights. They're one and the same. And when people are unsure about their livelihoods and basic needs, they have less security and less trust in their community. And it is harder for them to invest in the future. That's why collective action to build a healthy community that cares about each other's well-being is so incredibly important. This solidarity is developed over time, kind of like a muscle. The stronger it gets, the more it can be used to protect all of us from harm. And I know that UMass Boston is a diverse place. As Boston's only public urban research university, your students come from all over the world and bring diverse cultures to enrich your campus community. And earlier today, as I mentioned, I get to meet some of your excellent grad students and learn, and undergrad students too, and learn about the exciting projects they are working on. Their passion and their enthusiasm are inspiring. And I know that they will help build peace and find solutions to many of our world's problems. Many of them are international students, hoping to bring what they learn here back to help make their own country stronger and more peaceful. But right now, the human rights of students just like them in Massachusetts and across the country are under attack. And I know a lot of people are afraid right now. I heard that in our meeting, and they're afraid with good reason. Just up the red line at Tufts University, a Turkish doctoral student, Rumisa Öztürk, was kidnapped on the street a few weeks ago in plain daylight by a masked squad of plainclothes ICE agents. They claim she was, quote, supporting terrorists. This is false. This is a lie. An internal State Department memo found that she had done no such thing and that there were no grounds to revoke her visa. None. Since then, more than 1,200 international students and recent graduates across the country have had their visas changed or canceled, including, and I'm told that the number is up to 11 right here at UMass Boston. They now face possible deportation. In many cases, they and their schools were not even informed. Late last week, I sent a letter to Secretaries of State and to the Secretary of Homeland Security demanding answers on these deportations. But don't wait for me to get a response. We need to start pushing back now, to start protesting and raising our voices to say that these actions are the actions of a police state, and they are not acceptable in this country. The right to free speech and assembly is guaranteed to us in America, citizens and non-citizens alike, under the First Amendment to the Constitution. So too, under international law, the right to free expression is recognized by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which the United States helped create in the wake of the devastation of World War II, using our own Bill of Rights as a model. Forced disappearances on the street of people who were critical of the government were common during the Civil War in El Salvador. Students, scholars, labor leaders, campesinos, and priests were detained and held without any due process, tortured, and sometimes killed because of their leadership and their political beliefs. During the Pinochet dictatorship in Chile, scholars, artists, and political opponents were forced into exile, denied the right to stay in the country that they loved. Russia's invasion of Ukraine today is not only destroying buildings, infrastructure, and countless human rights, it is also targeting Ukrainian history, museums, churches, and schools, killing poets, artists, and writers. This cultural erasure seeks to deny that Ukrainian people even exist. Putin thinks that he can rewrite history and turn his propaganda into reality by force. The killing of ideas and identities can be just as devastating to the collective soul of a people as outright violence. And today, President Trump is copying these authoritarian behaviors, disappearing people, repressing speech, using state power to force schools and museums to rewrite history to fit his party's ideology and his own personal views. These examples show why it is so important to be vigilant and to stand up for our ideas, for our right to have ideas and express them freely, because that is what is at stake today. Don't kid yourself. That is what is at stake today. Universities have often been at the forefront of struggles for freedom because they represent the power of critical thinking, truth, and evidence. These values threaten the ability of dictators and mob bosses to claim that facts are whatever they say they are. Knowledge is power, and the powerful don't like to share. Universities stand at the front line in defense of these principles. Some have caved to this administration's coercion. Harvard is one that has not, and now it is facing retaliation by the state for refusing to compromise the principles of academic freedom and free speech, with the government withholding more than $2 billion in federal funds and threatening to end its tax-exempt status. This is demonstrably authoritarian behavior by our own government. This isn't just about Harvard. It's about whether any university, public or private, can teach the truth without fear. Whether academic freedom means anything at all when the government starts attaching ideological strings to funding and shutting down schools that teach ideas that they don't like. And if we let that happen here, no institution will be safe. So what can we do? In particular, what can you do to defend human rights and democracy here in our own communities? Well, we can learn a lot from other countries that have faced authoritarian leaders and have overcome them. You know, one lesson is that there is great power in the collective action of the people when they organize and when they mobilize. Dictators depend on the cooperation of the people that they rule. It is very costly to force everyone to obey at the point of a gun. So they depend on most people falling in line voluntarily. Let us deny them that cooperation. And while we're on that theme, let's not assume that institutions are going to save us from authoritarianism. Time after time throughout history, what has become clear is that institutions do not save us. People save us. Because the power of the people is always stronger than the people in power. And the end of the apartheid regime in South Africa happened in the 1990s, in part because of the economic power of people around the world who refused to buy South African products that benefited the regime. And these same people forced their own governments to boycott and strangle South Africa's economy, crippling the government's resources to keep itself in power. In our own country, here in the United States, civil rights activists in the South met the hate and violence of segregation and racist laws with boycotts of buses and local businesses. When they collectively exercised their buying power, the Black community forced the state and white-owned businesses to change laws and to reduce discrimination. In Poland, a pro-democracy solidarity labor union helped to build a coalition that mobilized diverse groups across society in nonviolent resistance, culminating in a general strike. This exposed the fiction of the communist regime's claims to be the defender of workers and put sufficient pressure on the regime that it paved the way for a peaceful transition to democracy in 1989. In each of these struggles, solidarity among student movements, labor unions, faith groups, and many other sectors of society was an essential element of resistance. They recognized that they were all in the same boat and that an attack on one should be seen as an attack on all. They didn't wait until their own lives were on the line, but they stepped up to defend others, to create coalitions to defeat injustice. And today, you have more power than you realize to do the same thing. Unite with other students, with faculty and staff to reject the political encroachment of authoritarian control over university learning. You can demand that your leaders join together with those of other universities to reject demands that universities abandon their autonomy and values in order to receive government funding. Otherwise, each university will be picked off individually until there is no one left to fight. The other key lesson we can learn is the importance of planning and strategy. Dr. King didn't wake up one morning and start marching. Behind every sit-in, every boycott, every speech was a plan, carefully organized by a network of ordinary people who believed in extraordinary change. We need that kind of planning now, that kind of discipline, and that kind of courage. You have experts on your faculty and among your community in nonviolent action, and that knowledge and training is sorely needed right now at this very moment, because defending human rights and opposing authoritarian regimes takes planning, unity, and nonviolent discipline. But when people power is mobilized for good, it is the best hope we have of turning the tide of oppression. Now, let me end with a quote. Eleanor Roosevelt once said that universal human rights begin in small places close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood he lives in, the school or college he attends, the factory, farm, or office where he works. Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. And unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. Without concerned citizens' action to uphold them close to home, we shall look in vain for progress in the larger world. You know, Eleanor Roosevelt was right. Human rights begin in small places, close to home, and so must our resistance. So I want to leave you with this. Find those small places, your campus, your neighborhood, your local school board, and bring your voice. Stand with others. Speak out. Organize. Refuse to let cruelty become policy. And do not let silence become complicity. Because the arc of history doesn't bend on its own. It bends when people push. And in moments like this, especially in moments like this, when injustice feels loud and truth feels quiet, your voice matters more than ever. Authoritarianism is not inevitable. We can choose to stand together and fight back and to make a better future for all those who come after us. And I hope you will join me in that effort. So let's get to work. Thank you very much. I've just been given the signal to, if anyone has any questions or comments or, yeah, just, I think I'd get you a microphone so everybody can hear.
Thank you for your leadership, Congressman McGovern. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
I've worked with your office. We've met before. You probably don't remember me. You meet a lot of people. You're a member of Congress. The last time we saw each other in person was in your office in Northampton, and a group of us were lobbying you on Yemen war power. John Boniface,
Oh, yeah.
Jackie Whelan, Isaac Evans, Fred, you remember now.
All
right?
great leaders and heroes.
Yeah, so that's where my question for you lies. You painted the broad scope of human rights around the world. As you know very well, we're in a very special juncture right now on the question of human rights in the Middle East and US responsibility for that. And Yemen and Gaza loom large. And the question of the Constitution and the law also applies here. And as you know, there's a little bit of a downbeat in Democrats talking about how most Democrats, not you, but most Democrats talking about how the Constitution and the law also applies here. Article 1 of the Constitution, War Powers Resolution of 1973, Arms Export Control Act of 1976, Foreign Assistance Act of 1961. You know what I'm talking about. You've been a leader on this. Saudi Cluster Bomb Amendment in 2016, Yemen Foreign War Powers Resolution with Roe Conner. You know that just the other day, Uncle Bernie introduced the JRD in the Senate on Gaza. 15 Democratic senators voted yes. You know that the Trump administration is bombing Yemen without congressional authorization in violation of Article 1 of the Constitution and the War Powers Resolution of 1973. You know that the only tool that the House has that's privileged when Democrats in the minority is a privileged resolution pursuant to the War Powers Resolution of 1973, which you have supported in the past. I believe you signed the letter of the 30 just now.
Mhm.
So my question is, when are you going to call the question? When are you going to swing for the fence? When are you going to introduce the Yemen War Powers Resolution and call a vote on the floor?
Well, you just challenged me to focus on that issue, which I promise I will. Look, I mean, I also think we have to, not ignore, strategy either. And so when you get blown out of the water, it doesn't help the cause. And so if we're gonna do something like that, we need to organize and we need to make sure that we have a respectable vote. And on the joint resolutions of disapproval that Bernie introduced in the Senate, we are more restricted in the House, although I'm a co-sponsor of them, because I think what's happening right now in Gaza is unacceptable. And the idea that we're sending 2-ton bombs to Mr. Netanyahu to utilize in that small area, I think betrays our values. And we need to be working toward peace rather than working to annihilate the Palestinians. But I promise you, I will focus on the Yemen resolution. But again, I want to make sure that if we do something, then I'm not showing our weakness, that I'm showing our strength. And again, that's where people power comes in, and that's where organizing comes in.
Thank you, Congressman. Your colleague, Senator Van Hollen, is
Yeah.
currently in El Salvador. Yesterday, he, in a media engagement, said that some of his colleagues will be joining him. Will you be joining him?
Yeah, no, I don't know whether he's gonna go, Senator Van Hollen, to go back down again. I'm trying to, I've been thinking about trying to do that. Senator Booker is potentially organizing a trip, and I've reached out to him. And look, I want to go down there if for no other reason. I want to get access to the prison because I want proof of life. I want to make sure that Mr. Garcia is still alive. We don't know that, right? I don't know if he's been tortured. We don't know what he's been through. And the idea that Senator Van Hollen, who is the senator who represents him, couldn't even get access to see him, I think speaks volumes. And El Salvador is a very, very dangerous place right now. And President Bukele, who goes around bragging that he's the coolest dictator in the world, those are his words. And he seems to have cozied up to Trump, and Trump seems to have cozied up to him. But the idea that your tax dollars right now are going to help pay for people to be housed in this notorious concentration camp, and then now we're talking about maybe sending more money to El Salvador for them to build more prisons, not just for migrants, but for US citizens. Again, but I want to go. I want to make sure that going means that we can kind of either attract necessary attention or hopefully get access to be able to see Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, Congressman McGovern. Appreciate your words, especially you reminding us that we need to organize. But one of the things that your introduction by the provost left out some of the work you've done around Cuba. And considering what's happening in the world, Cuba is sort of been, not mentioned a lot. Can you tell us a little bit about the work you've done with Cuba? And also, I was sanctioned or disciplined by the university by saying I had unauthorized trips to Cuba. And if you can talk about the fact that despite what's going on, that there are still ways in which we can go to Cuba.
Yeah, no, there are still ways to go to Cuba, although the Trump administration is trying to make it as difficult as possible. But I'll just be very honest with you. I mean, I think U.S. policy toward Cuba is one of the stupidest policies I think we've ever engaged in. It makes no sense to me. Rather than engaging with Cuba, rather than trying to find common ground, I mean, with this island just 90 miles off the coast of Florida, we've treated it like it's as powerful as Russia or China or both combined, and we've tried to economically strangle the island. And that hasn't done anything to hurt the leaders, but it's hurt average Cubans. I think it's a cruel and rotten thing for the United States to be doing right now or at any time. And so I've been advocating for lifting the embargo and normalizing relations between the two countries for as long as I can remember. I've been there many, many times. Actually, Congressman Moakley was a big advocate of normalizing relations with Cuba. I've tried to find projects that we could work together on to try to build relationships, and one of them it was we helped restore the Hemingway House, which is outside of Havana. It turns out that this woman from Massachusetts, Jenny Phillips, was the granddaughter of Max Perkins, who was Ernest Hemingway's editor, and she was told that in this house were lots of documents pertaining to her grandfather and wanted to get access to them. And Fidel Castro was still alive at the time, and I had asked him whether we could have access to the house, and he gave us access. And sure enough, there was all this information that Jenny never would have known about her grandfather. After that, we decided to form a foundation to raise money to help restore the house and to protect the documents, which is still an ongoing effort. I pleaded with President Obama. I was part of a group, so was Senator Van Hollen, to meet with him on multiple occasions in the White House, asking him to take Cuba off the terrorist list. There's no reason why they're on the terrorist list other than the fact somebody thought it was a mean thing to do. And he finally did that. And then we had a little period where things began to improve. The quality of life for average Cubans began to improve. The dialogue and the relationships and the understanding between our two governments began to improve. And then Trump became president. And for political reasons, put Cuba back on the terrorist list. And then we tried to plead with Biden. And in one of the most frustrating kind of interactions I've had with President Biden ever, for 4 years, we pushed and pushed and pushed. And then in December, after he lost the election, he took Cuba off the terrorist list, only to have Trump put them back on when he gets sworn in January. But as I said before, we can have differences with governments. But when you put blanket sanctions on a country without any regard to how it impacts regular people, you increase hunger, you increase illnesses, you increase hopelessness and all kinds of hardships on people who just want to get on with their life. And so, again, our policy has been a disaster. And to the right-wing Cubans who supported Trump in the last election because he's promised to put them back on the terrorist list, I think they expected that he would protect the Cubans who are in the United States. What he has said is he's not providing any special protection to the Cubans who are in the United States, who are not citizens. And so now they are subject to deportation. So again, we need some rationality in our foreign policy. And Cuba seems like a small thing, with all that's going on. But you know what? You know, as I said up in with our meeting earlier, Trump is employing a tactic right now that authoritarians throughout history have employed. They flood the zone with a million things. So every day you don't know where to be outraged because there's too many things that he's throwing at you. And sometimes we feel overwhelmed and we step back. We have to resist that feeling. And then we have to focus in on things like, how do we keep on doing our work on Cuba? How do we keep on doing our work, you know, in trying to encourage peace in the Middle East and getting humanitarian aid to the Palestinians? How do we keep on working for human rights all over the world? And how do we fight to protect our Constitution and our democracy here in the United States? Again, this is not a time for acquiescence. This is not a time, you know, for the faint of heart. This is a time for courage. This is a time for boldness. And I was joking with somebody, earlier that, 5 years from now, maybe we could all meet up at a bar, and we can then look back on this moment and say, we stood together, and we protected our democracy, and we kind of righted this ship. We're back on the right course, or we're going to say we blew it, and we don't have a democracy, and that the Constitution has been thrown in the trash. And that all the things that we talked about will not matter. These people don't care about human rights. They don't care about human dignity. All they care about is money and profit and power. And so, I'm hopeful, but we have a lot of work to do.
Well, I was curious, I've been thinking about, I think, part of how we got to where we are today, not the only reason, is because Democrats have failed to speak to working class people. Unfortunately, the reality is, I think the typical American isn't concerned about authoritarianism or the things they're concerned about, can they afford food or the mortgage or whatever it might be. So I'm curious to hear from you, specifically for you, what do you want to do? What do you hope to do with Democrats to help them come back to, the party of the working class, of protected labor unions? Because I think that might have been something Democrats could have done, but failed to. So I was curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, let me say two things. What I'm most shocked about in the last election is not that Trump got a few more votes. He didn't really improve very much on his previous performance. What was more shocking is the number of people that did not vote. And there are a number of reasons for that. I think some people were frustrated with the Democrats because of the silence on what was happening in the Middle East. But I think a bigger reason why people didn't show up was this, that, so these people lived through George W. Bush, they lived through Barack Obama, they lived through the first Trump regime, they lived through Joe Biden, and you know what, they came to the conclusion that their life didn't get any better. That basically, they're still living paycheck to paycheck. They still worried about paying their bills at the end of the month. They couldn't afford to go on vacation. They couldn't afford to help their kids with school. They couldn't afford to get a new wash machine. They can't afford to fix the roof, and that nothing was changing. And I think there's truth to that, because I think one of the problems the Democrats have had in recent decades is that we think that the way to win elections is by trying to please everybody, and to thread the needle and to make sure that nobody thinks we're going too far one way or the other. And I really, when I talk to people in my district, I mean, people are pissed about how hard it is to get health care, how expensive it is, how costly prescription drugs are here in the United States as opposed to Canada, or European countries. And they want to know, what are you going to do to make things differently? Well, we ought to be advocating for a public option and the Affordable Care Act. So, I did the first hearing in Congress on Medicare for all. That's what I want. I'm not sure we're going to get there soon, but let's figure out how we get there. Rather than a Medicare prescription drug bill, how about a prescription drug bill for everybody, so we can lower prices, right? I mean, that's the kind of stuff people really want. We talked earlier about affordable housing. I mean, bottom line is, we ought to make housing affordable for everybody. We're probably not gonna expect landlords to lower rents, but you know what? We could do more to subsidize affordable housing and to help families be able to, live in a decent place. Those are the things that we should be talking about. Cleaner energy, making education more affordable. So I think all those things to come back, it has to be about more than Trump's a disaster. And he is a disaster. But it also has to be about what we're for. But the second thing I'm gonna say is, I think more Americans care about things like authoritarianism and human rights and international affairs than I think they really know. I had a conversation at one of my gatherings, someone was saying, well, I don't really care about USAID. Who cares about what happens halfway around the world? And I said, you know what USAID does? We help feed hungry people, and that's a good thing. Not only because it's morally a good thing to do to make sure people don't go hungry, but it's in our national security interest. If we're helping people feed their families, they'll like us. And if they like us, they won't blow us up. I don't know, radical idea, but that's me. But we also try to combat disease and illness that occurs halfway around the world. And the reason why that's important, it's not just because we're gonna help, save lives there in these various countries, but diseases travel. And what's uncontrolled in Africa or Asia or wherever part of the world, South America, wherever, will end up here. I mean, we now have, I was told we have cases of dengue fever in the southern part of the United States. Malaria is on the rise. Notwithstanding the great strides that PEPFAR have made, the cutbacks, we see HIV/AIDS on the rise. I mean, we now have medicines that can basically keep the virus dormant in those who have it. And if we continue this regimen, we could eradicate the disease entirely if we keep with it. But now we see cases going up. Tuberculosis is on the rise again, and God knows what other kind of pandemic might develop. And so part of what we have to do for those of us who are in the human rights world, we have to do better. We have to explain to people why it matters, and we have to help make the connections. Because sometimes people don't make the connections. When you do, they get it. And they say, okay, now I know why USAID is important. Yeah, now I know why, it's a bad idea to shut that down. Oh, now I know why advocating for human rights is important. So in addition to the work that you're all going to be focused on in your studies and in your careers, you also have to kind of be explainers to people. And the people that I'm talking about, are not just the wider audience, but people, in your family, people you have coffee with, people you encounter at various social functions, because we need to start convincing people one by one. The work that you're doing here is incredibly important. I mean, basically, it's going to save us. And I want to keep on moving forward. I don't want to move backwards. And right now we're in danger of moving backwards. The way to combat this is to make sure that politicians understand what the realities are and what the facts are, and members of the community do, because they impact politicians. And so in any event, it's a long answer to your question. I'm sorry. There.
Thank you so much for this talk. I have a question that I think will benefit a lot of international students in the room. And as the numbers of international student visas, whose visas are being revoked, is continuously growing, there is a lot of uncertainty among students. And I also sense a little bit of helplessness from our leaders, our professors, and at different levels of the university. So my question is, I wanted to ask you to kindly speculate, based on your knowledge and expertise, what we can expect in the coming months. What's coming and how can we best prepare prepare ourselves. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, to be honest with you, I didn't expect this. I mean, I didn't expect a targeting of international students who have visas, who are here studying right now. I didn't expect that even this administration would be targeting many of you. So I'm shocked at this, quite frankly. And we have, again, I'm trying to get answers from the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Homeland Security about, like, tell me what's going on here. And I also want to know, what is the appeal process for people who all of a sudden get notified? I mean, it has to be an appeal process. I want to know whether they're targeting people because of something you posted online, or because you were seen with somebody who maybe is an activist. I don't know. I don't know what the rationale. They don't tell you what the rationale is. But we need to know those answers. But the people that are being targeted right now have not committed any crime. I mean, you know, if you went and robbed a bank, okay, that's why you're getting your visa revoked. But that's not what this is. That's not what this is. Modern day McCarthyism.
Yeah.
That's what people are being targeted simply because they're from another country. And let me just say a couple more quick things here. This is awful for all of you who are worried. It is awful for our country and our brand. You know, I mean, the number of foreign students that come to this country not only support our universities and our colleges, some work here, some stay here, some are brilliant scientists. They do amazing things. You know, that is all to our advantage. Now, you know, I'm hearing that we have people who wanted to study here who are now saying, well, why should I go there? I'm not gonna be welcome. Maybe I should go to France or UK or Canada or Australia. You know, some are going to China because at least there'll be some certainty. And you don't have to worry about, you know, having your visa revoked. This is really, really bad for this country right now. But again, this is part of what I call this modern day McCarthyism, where immigrants, no matter who you may be, are being demagogued and demonized because they seem to think there's some political gain to be had here. And again, as I said earlier, many of us, myself included, have to do a better job of explaining to our own constituencies about the value you bring here, about the value of immigration in general. We are a nation of immigrants. I don't know how many people that I talk to who are truly can trace their ancestry back to North America. I mean, my family comes from Ireland and Poland, so you know, I'm not one, but I'm here because of immigration, and so we should be rejoicing in that. We should be celebrating that, and our economy is so dependent on all of you. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I will tell you this: we're trying to get answers, and we will communicate that as we get responses. Jeff, you know, you all know Jeff, so if any of you get in trouble with ICE or whatever, please call us and we could try to do what we can to intervene. I can't say we will absolutely be able to help, but we need to push back. And again, I would also say that I think every university and every college in this country needs to be united in pushing back. This cannot be allowed to go forward.
I got a question for you, Congressman.
I know we have.
Really? All right, it's just been brought to my attention that the Trump administration has decided to close over. All right. It has been brought my attention that the Trump administration has decided to close over 100 embassies and diplomatic missions across the globe, most of which are in sub-Saharan Africa. And how likely is it that the next Democratic president, which I hope will be Gavin Newsom, will reverse those policies?
Well, I hope that whoever the next president is will not only reverse those stupid decisions, but will understand the importance of engagement in the world. The world is small, you know, and we're not just an island that can ignore what happens everywhere else in the world. We have to be engaged. And I'll just close with this, I remind people this all the time. Look, all the stuff that's transpired is depressing and awful and it's disturbing. But here's the reality, we can't change the past. All we can do is to shape the future. That's the power we have. We have the power to shape the future. And again, I say this sincerely, listening to many of the students talk earlier in the day, I'm hopeful. I mean, you represent the best of this planet, and I think the values that you bring to the table, tell me that we could have a world that is at peace. We could have a world where we're lifting up people's rights, human rights, and social rights, and economic rights. Anything is possible. And so I look forward to being wind at your back, and I look forward to many other interactions. And again, thank you for the honor of being here today.
Thank you so much, Congressman McGovern, for reminding us all of what we need to do today, for taking the time to be with us tonight. And thank you again to everyone for being here, and I hope we all take these words very much to heart. Good evening, everyone.